Look at these babies. Now these were planted around the end of March, 1st of April, and those ones there were planted as soon as the soil could be worked, and they germinated. Geez, the ones back there germinated like a month and a half ago, and so did these, give or take. Hey, it's Greg here at MaritimeGardening.com, and I'm not wearing a hood because it's cold. It's actually one of the rare warm days we've had this spring. It's just the flies, as I've mentioned many times before. So I thought I'd make a video this evening while there's still some light and talk about the difference between affecting a microclimate in your garden and not affecting a microclimate in your garden. So I got a couple beds here where I had domes and different things over the seedlings as they were growing, and other beds where the exact same thing was growing where there wasn't a dome. So, and I'm not trying to sell anything here, I'm just showing you the difference. And you know, a lot of these things don't matter if you live somewhere with a lot of sun and a lot of heat. You can just wait for it to get warm and have a great growing season. But if you live somewhere far north, or even like me where I'm in Zone 6A, which is certainly not one of the colder places in the world, but we tend to have a short growing season despite, there's a fly on my screen. We still tend to have a short growing season because the spring is just so foggy and cold and overcast. We don't really start to get sun and heat until the summer solstice, like around the end of June sort of thing. So that's the situation we're in here. And I'm going to show you some examples of how the microclimates I've affected to take advantage of the few warm sunny days we've had has made a huge difference in terms of the stage of growth of the plants compared to places where I didn't affect that. I'm going to start with some kale, so come along and have a look. Alright, so here's a garden where I've planted kale around the perimeter and onions in the middle, because you really don't do anything with onions during the growing season, but of course you have to access the kale all season long, so I thought it made sense to put the kale around the perimeter. And there's a variety of kale that I sowed in the front here. I can't remember what it's called, I'll put it up on the screen. But there's one, and look how tortured it looks. It's been hammered with flea beetles, and it's just not that big. And here's another one right here. More flea. This is okay. I mean, the second leaves are coming in. It'll be all right. I've used a bit of insecticidal soap to try to mitigate those guys, but anyway, very small, like about an inch high at this stage. Right, there's another one, really knackered, right? Now, over there I've got some growing in a cold frame. Let's have a look. Look at these babies. Now these were planted around the end of March, 1st of April, and those ones there were planted as soon as the soil could be worked, and they germinated. Geez, the ones back there germinated like a month and a half ago, and so did these, give or take. There was a time when they were about the same. We had a warm week, and then it just got cold. Look at the difference. Same variety of kale. Maybe winter boar? I can't remember. I'll have to look it up. But look at the size of these ones, right? In a cold frame. With a little bit of reflective stuff here, because the angle of this cold frame is less than optimal, so that was a really easy solution. I've sowed some, I think, tomatoes over here. There's one right there. That's definitely a tomato under this plastic. Actually, they're all up. I better take the plastic off. Yep, they're all up. They came up today. There's a tomato, and there's a tomato. That's another great tip, you know, when you're sowing seeds. People are always wondering how often should I water them and that sort of thing. If you've ever heard of the seed germination method called the baggie method, where you put the seed in some paper towel in a plastic bag, this is sort of like the outdoor version of that. You plant the seeds, you put some soil over the seeds, tiny little bit, and you put a plastic bag over the soil. And then you just let nature take its course. And if you're lucky, they'll germinate. I don't see that these ones have come up. They may have grown and died, because I noticed, see, look, I honestly didn't think these had germinated, so this one actually looks like it's been sort of tortured to death. This one's okay. This one's all right. I'll have to give that some more water. But anyway, by putting the plastic over the soil, it keeps it moist. You don't have to water it all the time. You just put the plastic over the soil and leave it for about 5 days. And then after 5 days go by, for most seeds, you got to check it every day. Or almost every day. Or the plant will come up and it'll get too hot on a given day. Anyway, like this one here. This one looks like it's been nuked. This might have been an early emerger. I don't think it's going to come back. Anyway, we'll leave it and see what happens. But I think generally speaking, they're going to be all right. Here's another example of some lettuce, different kinds of lettuce. And there's some spinach right there. Different kinds of lettuce and spinach. Look, there's some spinach back here too. And you can compare it to my hand, the size of this spinach. Right? Not very big, maybe 2 inches high, right? So this had a sort of flat plastic tarp over it, and then I took it off well over a month ago. Over here, I got Swiss chard and spinach and lettuce. And I mean, look at the size of the spinach. This is ready to harvest, right? It's not full-sized yet, but it's definitely ready for cut and come again harvesting for salads and stuff like that. This had a dome on it till last week. From the end of March till last week. Look at the difference in size. Right? A lot of people, they think maybe their soil isn't any good. And if you're somewhere with not a lot of sunlight and not a lot of heat, it may just be that you don't have heat. So I mean, those ones that were a lot smaller are right there. Right, I'm here, they're 6 feet away. It's not like the growing conditions are any different over there. And it's not like over there, I've got lousy soil. It's perfectly good soil. The difference is this garden just had more sun, more heat. They both got the same amount of sun. Right? This garden had more heat. And that's why, look at the lettuce. The size of it, ready to harvest. Right? This would not be the case if I just sown these, let's say middle of April or 1st of April. They'd be puny, right? Go over there. Look over there, right? Got some Here's another bed where I've got kale. This is kale I sowed last fall. And I mean, it's a slightly different variety, but you know, it shouldn't be. The reason it's so far behind the stuff in the cold frame isn't the variety. Look, here's one. It's about 2-3 inches high. It's growing. And I just threw a whole bunch of seeds down here and let nature take its course, right? So I mean, these are coming up and they're doing all good, and despite a bit of pest damage, you can see the flea beetle damage if you look really closely, right? Some of them are emerging as the tough ones. Those are the ones that are going to get to live, basically, right? The rest of them will just be weeded out. But compare the size of these, right? This is like the biggest one right there. This one is the biggest one. It's maybe 3 inches high compared to the ones in my cold frame, which are like 12 inches high. Right? Pretty stark difference. Anyway, these will be fine, and these will come along a bit later. But you know, certainly if you want to get food on the table a little bit sooner, it doesn't hurt to affect some sort of microclimate in your growing environment. Look over here. So here is parsnips that I sowed last fall. And I had a little bit of plastic over this, but I took it off maybe a month and a half ago. And I've been working on thinning these out. I sowed these really heavily for those that watched that episode. And so here's a good example of a bed that's been thinned. I like to have one every 3 inches or so. And this bed's still not been thinned. I like to come out at like 5:30 a.m. and do that. And there's nothing worse than trying to thin seedlings on an evening like tonight when you can barely breathe due to the black flies. And that's even with fly repellent. You need a netting or something like that. Anyway, look at the size of these ones, right? They're okay, maybe 3 inches high. Now, let me take you over to a parsnip bed that had a dome on it right up until about a week ago. Look at these babies, right? The dome just came off because I had to use it somewhere else in my garden. And these have been all nicely thin. These were planted a lot tighter. And I got two different varieties here. On the left, I've got my own saved seeds. So these would be the exact same variety that's growing in that bed where they're all small. And over there, I've got a hybrid variety from the Bessie Seeds called Albion. They're about the same size, I have to say. And I'd say they're a good 5-6 inches, some of them. Right, they're doing great. And that's just the difference of leaving that dome over there. I mean, the dome's a bit, there's one over there. The dome's a bit of a cumbersome thing, and it's not as convenient as the sort of flat plastic rectangle type thing in terms of storage. But it does affect a better microclimate. It just gets a sort of, just heats up a lot better. So yeah, these are doing great. What else can I show you here? One more example. Here's a bed where I've got beets growing. And I had a dome over this. Probably, I think it was that dome. That very dome was over here. And you can see how there's some stuff called colt's foot, lamb's quarters. This stuff here is lamb's quarters. You can eat that, and it's not a bad green. I cook it up. I got to probably thin. This is about the right size to pull them, in my opinion. Just before they flower, I like to let them grow and let them get some size. They're easier to pull, and they're just better for eating. These are related to spinach, lamb's quarters. This whole end of the garden, I'd thrown a whole bunch of seaweed on it, and the seaweed was inundated with lamb's quarters seeds from a beach where I got it from. So I still have some. Definitely, there's probably 5 or 6 years worth of. I didn't let any of it go to seed last year, but there's just so much of that in this. What you would call the seed bank that's in the soil. That I imagine I'll be getting this stuff for years. Anyway, you can see how the spinach grew, or the the beets grew in the middle, and see there's a couple growing along the edge there. They're just starting to grow. See how small these beets are? One of these domes was over this, and it's colder over here. So these ones really didn't germinate. They're sluggish, and so on and so forth. And I'm curious to see how they come along. They seem to have come in generally. I'll reseed where necessary. Like there's one right there. There's a beet right there. Right, and maybe some more will come up. A lot of them just sat there. Remember, I sowed these. This is one of the earliest beds I sowed. End of March, maybe either the last week of March or the first week of April, when everything was frozen. And even when I sowed these beets, about 1 or 2 inches down, the ground was frozen. And look at them now. So the largest ones are about 6. Like this one here is about 6 inches high, right? So I mean, these are beets that have been in a microclimate right up until about a week ago. Last weekend I planted my cucumbers in this bed, and I moved the dome from here to there. So they had a dome right up until the end of May. From the end of March to the end of May. You see the size of these beets. Now, and you see the difference between the middle where it's warm and the outer edge where it was cold. Right? Not as big. Now I can take you to another bed where the beets weren't covered nearly as long. Here in this bed, I've got different rows. I've got a row of beets and a row of salsify. It's my first year trying salsify. It's sort of a carrot, parsnip-like plant. I love planting root crops that are calorie crops that store well, and I've never tried salsify before, so I'm interested to try. Anyway, these were planted a little bit later, but certainly they didn't have a dome on them for nearly as long. And I mean, the beets are up, but you can see they're still quite small, maybe an inch or two high. Right? This is one of those perpetual spinach things. This is actually, I think that's some sort of kale, that one there. Looks like it anyway. Or arugula or something. I don't know what it is. Maybe a radish, I don't know. Anyway, this is like a perpetual spinach, which is basically a kind of beet green, I suppose. Those seeds were like 10 years old, and I just threw them in the ground. And they all seem to have come up. Isn't that fascinating? Anyway, the salsify's up. That's salsify, their weird looking thing. My first year with it, and I can't wait to try. But yeah, you can see the beets much smaller, right? Very small. I mean, they'll still come along fine, but nowhere near like the beets in the other bed. And for those of you that thought it was crazy to plant beans 2 weeks ago, if you look in here, you can see that my beans are up. Actually, something's been eating this one. Something's pecking at it. Some Probably it looks like slug damage to me. Anyway, beans are up, right? All along here. I had plastic over here. So despite, since I've planted these, we've had like a couple frost nights, a couple nights that were, below 4 degrees Celsius, maybe even a 0 night. And they were fine with the little plastic. You look at all these here. And these are a pole bean. The variety is called rattlesnake. Seeds I saved from last year. All doing fine. I just had it under these things here, right? I had them put over like that. That's all. They don't blow away. You get them nice and flat. Since we're talking about microclimates, I thought I'd just show you what I'm doing here. This is outside my garden enclosure, and I planted squash in this bed and in this bed. And I don't have a lot of domes, so I sort of made I don't know what you call this, like a poor man's dome / wallopini. So I put 2 sticks along the top. I put about 3 or 4 inches of mulch. And what I did was this is like a pumpkin bed, a squash. I think it's Blue Hubbard, I think. Anyway, the squash is in this. I made a little circle in the mulch. So this is probably 4 inches deep of mulch. I made a little circle, put the squash seed in here. Hopefully it's still viable. And put the plastic over. Just weight it down with some rotten logs. Like that, right? So this little thing across the top will keep it's like a little dome, right? A really temporary makeshift dome. Just enough to keep this soil warm for the next 3 weeks or so, while there's still a chance of frost, and also while I still want to keep the soil extra warm to get these squash to germinate. Right, so it's a really simple way of affecting a little quick, easy, cheap microclimate. And then when you got everything germinated and you're past all risk of frost, you just roll the plastic up and put it away, and it doesn't take up any room at all. And here I'm just using some dead trees and stuff like that to hold it down. If you do it right, it won't blow away. I get a lot of wind here. This won't blow away. And over here I've planted tomatoes. I probably have to water these tomorrow morning or the next day, but anyway. I've got tomatoes and basil planted underneath this dome. And I doubt anything has happened. Huh, look at that. They're actually up. So I just looked in that little hole there. I guess, yeah, stay with me here. Let's pop this thing off and I'll show you that my tomatoes. I mean, people in different parts of the world aren't going to think it's that amazing that I got tomatoes to germinate by the first week of June, but if you were living here with the spring we've had, this would be impossible without a plastic dome like this. So I had the plastic over this soil a good 2-3 weeks before I planted to make sure it was extra warm, and then I sowed the tomatoes. So let's have a look. All right, so there's some action here for sure. So I got 2 different varieties of tomato planted here. On the one side, you can see the tomato here. See that? That's one side there's a Roma, on the other side there's a beefsteak, as I recall. All the tomatoes are up. It looks like they just came up very recently. Maybe today. It was a really nice warm day today. We seem to get like 3 rainy days, and then a nice day, and then 3 rainy days. But these all seem to have come up. Another Roma there. And on the opposite side of the garden, not the middle row, but the next one, you can see there's tomatoes coming up. I don't know if you can tell, but that's a tomato right there. I can just tell by the way they look. More tomatoes right there. Right, there's some weed seeds, of course, but the tomatoes are coming up. And down the middle, despite the cold, we have both. So down the middle here, I planted parsley on one side and basil on the other side. And you can see, I don't know if you recognize, but that and that and that's basil. And over here, parsley, 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 parsley. I don't know how wise it was to plant the parsley and the basil sort of in the middle in the shade of the tomatoes, but it's so sunny here, and I'm going to have the tomatoes spaced out. I mean, I got tomatoes planted 3 inches apart here, but eventually the spacing, I'll thin them out. So they'll be like 2 hand spans apart, maybe even more. And nestle the tomatoes in elsewhere in the garden and sort of pick and choose which ones get to live here. So it'll be spacey enough that I think, and it's a nice sunny spot, that these herbs will do great. And I'm really happy with this technique. I haven't tried this before, planting those particular herbs which go with tomatoes in with the tomatoes. So I can't wait to see how well the basil, I love basil, and look at it all. How about that for easy? Instead of mucking around with transplants inside your house, stick them in the ground. Put a dome over it and let the magic happen. Right? And for people who might ask, when did I sow these? Basically, when I saw the dandelions bloom and become yellow, the yellow dandelion flowers on my lawn, that's when I said, okay, under a plastic dome, I think there's enough heat. There's enough heat for a dandelion to bloom, and maybe there's enough heat to get one of these to germinate under plastic. Anyway, just a short little midweek video that I threw together. I just had the idea about this. I was looking around this morning and I couldn't believe the difference in the rate of growth between the vegetables that I started in well set up microclimates as opposed to ones that either didn't have a microclimate or were done in a sort of haphazard, not as elaborate type setup. It's still worth doing, but when you've got a really good dome or some sort of microclimate set up around a plant, it can really make a difference, especially if you're challenged by just a lack of heat, a lack of sunlight, a shorter growing season, that sort of thing. All these things can make a big, sorry about the flies, all these things can make a big difference in terms of how soon you're going to be able to start getting some food out of your garden. We're already starting to get greens out of the garden. That's great, because I've just literally just last weekend ran out of food from last year's garden. My last beans and sort of last preserves, everything's gone. We're all out, and it worked out just right now, because we're starting to get things out of the garden. Not a lot, if we had to survive off this garden, we'd all starve to death at this point in time. But every year I try to get closer to that sweet spot of how big the garden needs to be, what to plant, and how much food value you can get out of the garden in a given season with the least amount of work possible. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting, and if you did, please like, share, subscribe. It's a bit late in the season, but take a note. Maybe watch this episode again February or something like that. If I remember, I'll remind people to watch it on Facebook or something like that. But just some ideas of ways to get things going and to show the sort of results that can, by comparison, right? Don't compare my results to what's happening where you are, because you may be in a different microclimate than me, or a different part of the world, or what have you. But just showing you within my same garden plants that are 10, 15 feet apart from one another, how much difference there is in size and that sort of thing. And the small ones will catch up and they'll come along. But it's nice to have some things come along a little sooner, so you can start getting food out of your garden, which is the whole point anyway. So I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com. And until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.